Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's SAP Community Call. My name is Svea Becker and I'm your technical host today. But of course, I'm not alone. I have Karin here with me. Let me shortly introduce Karin. Karin works, of course, for SAP. She works in product management team for cloud and lifecycle management, and she focuses on topics around transporting ABAP and non-ABAP. And this is great because this is the topic of today's call. And I would like to hand over to Karin, and I will put my video off afterwards so that you are not distracted. And Karin, you can go ahead. Welcome to the call today.
Thank you very much, Svea. So yeah, welcome also from my side. Yeah, as Svea already said, we today have a call about transporting ABAP and non-ABAP objects. So I would like to give you an introduction to the very different options that we have, but please don't expect that we go to all of them in every detail. We can't manage that in 1 hour. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the QA tool, but also feel free to mail me afterwards, or if there's a lot of demands, Svea, if it arrives at your time, we can also set up separate calls on very special topics if questions come up. So that's also.
Yeah, this is really great. And I will also add your community profile here. So you can also connect via SAP Community and also some of the links for your topic pages and tags and so on.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I will also stop my video also to save my bandwidth and hope that you enjoy the call. Okay, so let's get started. So what I would like to show to you today is first, what are the options that we have if you have ABAP systems in place, if you could use them for transporting, and what are the options if you don't use ABAP. So concerning ABAP, there's a lot of things available. We have the classical change and transport system. I assume that many of you already know that, but nevertheless, I will give you a short introduction what it is about. Then we do have the CTS Plus, so the enhanced change and transport system for ABAP, so that it can also work with non-ABAP applications, environments, whatever. Then we have central CTS, which allows you to combine things. And we have the quite new Git-enabled CTS, where I will give you a very short overview what it is, but there's a separate session in this community call series about GCTS that will take place on 24th of November. So if you're interested in the details of GCTS, there's already a separate session planned. So let's get started. So why at all do we need these transport systems? So the very basic idea of CTS, why it was invented some 25 years ago, is that you need an option to get your development in a safe way through a system landscape. So normally you would use some development system where developers create new objects, create new functionality, and then you would like to get it transported to your production system, because normally it's not possible, it's not allowed or whatever to do changes directly in the production system, but you need to first develop it, then it would be great to test it on some test system, and only then, if everything is fine, give the new functionality to your business users. And the best idea is if you had a way to transport things through this landscape instead of doing it on the development system, finding it okay, doing it again on the test system, and doing it again on the production system. That's quite error prone. It's better if you could do it on the development system, move exactly what you did to your test system, and on the test system, test everything, and only if it's okay in there, move exactly the same things to the production system without anyone having to do each line of coding again. And that's why CTS was invented. So in ABAP, you can set up transport landscapes that consist of as many systems as you like. So the classical example is that you have a development system, a test system, and a production system, but that's not the limit. You can only have 2 systems, you can have 20, you can have more systems delivered by one, and so on. What happens in there is that you have a transport request created on the development system where you collect the objects that you changed. When you finished your functionality, when it's ready to be tested, you would release this transport request and it will go into the test system. There's what we call an import queue. We will go to more details, and you can choose what has to be imported, but you don't do the coding again. And then if everything is okay, it would go to all of the follow-on systems, however you designed your landscape. So there are these systems and the transport routes in between that are used to move the coding from development to the final system. With this, it's much more safe that you get a working code to the production system. And the additional thing that you can do is you can integrate these transports with what we call change request management or quality gate management in SAP Solution Manager. So these are some kind of project management tools, some kind of process management tools that help you design your process from the initial request of a new functionality until it reaches your production system, so that you have a controlled view on things that happened, so that you can also have approval steps. So when the developer says my coding is finished, then maybe some quality manager can say, okay, I approve it, and so on. So this is what you could do with change request management and quality gate management. So how does this process work? First of all, you would start working in transaction SE80 for developing ABAP objects, or you would use transaction S-Pro for doing customizing on the ABAP system. In both cases, there are transport requests in the background that are used to collect the objects that you changed. And these transport requests are managed in transaction SE09. There you can see the workbench requests, you could see the customizing requests that you might have, and then you can decide as soon as you finished your coding to release the transport request. Releasing the transport request would then mean that you get a new entry in the import queue of the follow-on systems. So that's what's done in transaction STMS. You would go to the system where you would like to import your new coding, search for the transport request in the list and import it. Or you can also import all the open transport requests. So that depends on the strategy that you'd like to take. But nevertheless, you do have an overview of what has been imported, what requires an import, and if the import was successful and stuff like this, that's made visible via the return code. And if there's something wrong with an import, you could also always click on the return code to get more details, to get a protocol, a log, what happened, what might have gone wrong. So in detail, whenever you touch something in SE80, or it's the same if you use the ABAP development tools, whenever you touch a new object, create a new object, you will be asked to name a transport request. And then you can choose from the requests that you already have, that you're already working on, if the functionality that you developed depends on something else that you already did or relates to what other developers do and so on, or you can create new requests. And for each transport request, you can work with different users. So every user can have his own task, what we call this sub-entity on the transport request, and collect his objects inside this transport request. And you can only release the complete transport request to get it to the follow-on systems after each and every developer released his task on the transport request. So with this, you can also make sure that if different people have to contribute to a new functionality, all of them give their okay before something is imported or transported into the next system. So that's what happened in SE09. So it depends on your permissions for sure, or you can also do it in SE80. That is what you do in there, release the transport or the task first, and then the transport request. You can also always go to the details. So open up the tree somehow. You can see the transport request, you can see the task, and you can see the objects that are part of this task. And when you export something or release the transport request, you will get an export protocol that tells you whether the export was successful or whether it's finished and stuff like this. After that, you would go to the target system. So transaction STMS, that's what you can see on this screenshot, shows the system landscapes that you have. And in there, you could go to the different systems and check the import queue of the respective system. You can monitor what has been imported. There's also options to schedule stuff so that, I don't know, if it's a test system, you could schedule a import for every evening after developers finish their daily work, and then all the things that they released during the day can be imported at once. So it really depends on your strategy, how you would like to handle this transport. An additional thing that you can do with CTS, with the pure classical ABAP CTS, is transport SAP HANA objects. If your ABAP system is on HANA and if these objects belong together. So it's not to manage pure HANA transports in the cloud or whatever. It's about ABAP on HANA systems where you also develop HANA native objects. And with this HANA transport for ABAP, you can include these HANA objects into a standard classical ABAP CTS transport request. There is a transaction for that, where you can view the objects, where you can synchronize the objects from the HANA repository to ABAP. In this database table, you would then find, by the help of this viewer, the objects that are already synchronized, the ones that need to be synchronized. So that's the overview that you can see on this screen. And you can then decide what you would like to put into a certain transport request. And with this, you can transport the ABAP objects and the HANA objects also together in one transport request. So this is a functionality that's easy to use, so there's no configuration required. It works out of the box as it is. It works for HANA 1.0, so with the repository. You can also use it in HANA 2.0 if you use the repository option still. But if you like to go for the HDI object, then you will, in the next, after a few slides, see how it works in that case. But for now, we only look at the repository stuff, so at HANA 1.0. So how does this process work? You would use the HANA development environment. You would create your packages, you would develop your objects, and then you would synchronize these on the source system into the ABAP database. And from there, after the synchronization, after you decided what has to be transported, you could then have a transport request and manage it as you know, as we've seen it before. So still SE09 transport request, task, release the transport request, go to the import queue of the follow-on system and start the import. That's what happens in the next step. So you would find these transport requests, it's normal ABAP workbench requests in the import queue, and you can import them. That would mean that the objects will go to the same database table on the ABAP side and will be synchronized into the repository on the HANA side. That's all happening in the background when you import the transport request. So on the export side, you do have to do the synchronization actively because we cannot automate what has to be synchronized or what you would like to transport. But on the import side, when you import the transport request, everything, synchronization, activation, what goes to the HANA repository is done automatically. Okay, if we start with HANA 2.0 and HANA deployment infrastructure, then we have a new thing that we call HDA for HDI, which is able to work with the HDI way of handling HANA objects. So why not HDA, what we've seen before, anymore? You can use it for sure if you do XSC development, so XS classic environment. So this is the HANA repository thing. But with HANA 2.0, this HANA repository stuff is deprecated. And you can find it in detail in this SAP note. So in addition, HANA repository was not able to support zero downtime maintenance. So these are the two reasons why HTA is not suitable in HANA 2.0. And that's why we went for supporting HANA deployment infrastructure. So in there, the HDI objects are developed in the Web IDE, so as an XSA application in this HANA Web IDE in this XSA application. ABAP is still leading, but you need to get the Web IDE connected. What you need to do, or what you would do, is you would create HDI containers in the database. If you need to know more about the HDI stuff, you can go to this support portal page. But in principle, an HDI container contains 3 database schemas where the runtime objects are, source objects, and some object owner schema. So that's what HDI is about. If you decide to go for HDI, you would have to do some preparation. So pure HDA for the HANA repository was working out of the box without any configuration required. But for HDI, you would need to do some configuration. There's a guide which describes details. You will find the link at the end of this presentation. After you did this basic configuration, you would also have to create containers and add them to a transport request. So there's a transaction SCTS AMHC named, where you can create these different types of containers. So there are data containers, there are all this type of containers that you have in HDI that you might need. After that, you would need to go to the ABAP development tools to ADT, so this ABAP in Eclipse, and there you would need to create namespaces. And then process starts as known. You would need to go to the SE09 and release task and transport request and so on. So that was for the preparation for the containers. When you then do development, you would do it as you know in Web IDE, develop your objects, build them and deploy the objects to the HDI container. You would then consume these HDI objects in ABAP in a report, for example, or whatever you like to do with these objects. And you would check them into ABAP. So after that, you can add things to the transport request because objects first need to be known in ABAP before you can add them to a transport request. And then again, same thing as before, release task, release transport request. The import side stays as simple as it always was. So you would go for the STMS queues, go for your system, check the transport request and decide what has to be imported. And then you can go to ADT again and execute your ABAP objects and test cases and whatever you might need to do. Okay, so that was it for pure ABAP. The next step is if you have non-ABAP environments, objects, whatever, that are not included in the classical CTS. That's what we call the enhanced CTS. The idea or the need is still the same. So many ABAP or many non-ABAP environments come with the issue that there is no transport available. So many times there is options to download stuff. There's options to get things downloaded and uploaded and so on. Sometimes there's also transport options available. It really depends on the application. Maybe there are different options already available, but nevertheless, you would have to observe different tools, different ways of moving objects from your development to your test and production system. And it would be much easier if you had just one tool that is made or that helps you with all of these transports. And that's the idea of CTS Plus. So the idea is that you can get a representation of your non-ABAP landscape inside the classical CTS so that you can design the landscape in the same way as you might have done it for ABAP systems. So you would use one ABAP system, and on this ABAP system, you would create your landscape with pointers for sure to the real systems. With this, the idea is then that you can have, again, transport requests integrated hopefully in the development environment of the respective application and get stuff moved through your landscape. Charm and QGM to make.
Karin, at the moment we are facing some connection issues. I cannot hear you anymore.
Audible. No, okay.
So maybe you can repeat this slide here from slide number 19.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me again?
Yes, I think I can hear you again now.
Okay, strange. I haven't seen anything on my side which didn't work. Okay, yeah, sure. I will start with this again.
Okay.
So yeah,
thanks.
the basic, yeah, no problem. Sorry for that. I have no idea what happened. Your system landscape of your non-ABAP systems represented in CTS on the ABAP side so that you get representations of the different systems inside CTS with pointers for sure. Same that you have a development system, a test system, and a production system, but that you can use classical CTS to get your objects moved through this landscape, and that you can also use the same transport requests. You would also have the option to use the change request management and the quality management. Auditable if you're have these requirements to document everything that you did on your different systems. In addition, you would for sure need one system where you can host these landscapes. And there the idea is also that you could use SAP Solution Manager as the system where you get or create these landscape representations. Okay, so first of all, for sure, you need to have a setup phase. So you would have to set up for the cloud platform accounts for sure, that's a prerequisite. Then you would need to establish connections from the CTS system to the different accounts that you have on cloud platform. We organize a web UI. So this is somehow where you can manage the transport requests and so on for the non-ABAP systems. So for ABAP, we had SE09 for these tasks, transaction SE09, and for non-ABAP, we have the transport organizer web UI. The idea of this web application is that it can hopefully also be integrated of the different applications, so you can directly access a tool to manage the transport request instead of having to log on to ABAP and use SE09. SE09 is not used for classical CTS, for CTS. In addition, you need to configure an application type for SAP Cloud Platform so that the ABAP system knows what to do with this kind of objects attached to a transport request. And then for sure, you would have to create these representations of your cloud platform accounts on the CTS system and connect them via transport routes. So that's the classical thing that you always have to do. How would the process look like? So first, you would do your changes in the development environment of your application. So this is just an example screenshot of the web IDE. It can be any editor of the respective application if this application supports CTS Plus for sure.
Karin, I have to interrupt you again. I'm sorry.
No
there were some disruptions on slide, I think slide 19. So I have asked people in the chat if they need to get a repeating of something. Yeah, and I think 19 and 20 you should start there again, because there were some interruptions.
Okay.
Not for everyone, but for some. So if it's okay for you, and
yeah, no problem.
Yeah, okay,
fine with me.
Okay,
I hope that the recording at least contains everything.
Yeah, so maybe I try to cut it out.
Yeah, no worries. It's fine.
All right.
Okay. So yeah, what's the basic idea of CTS Plus? So the idea is that you can use the mechanisms of CTS also for non-ABAP systems, so that you can use one tool for managing all of your transports that you have for all of the different applications, for all of the different development. You can also use on top SAP Solution Manager for managing all of these centrally, so that you can also use your transports to be audible, to be on the safe side if you need to document what you did. So if you look at CTS Plus in SAP Cloud Platform as an example for the setup, you would first need to set up the Cloud Platform accounts. So then you would need to have established connections from the accounts to the CTS Plus system, and for sure the other way around. So that would mean to set up some HTTPS connections, cloud connectors, and so on. You would have to configure the Transport Organizer web UI. So that's the application that we use in the CTS Plus instead of SE09 to manage the transport requests. This is used for all of the applications that support CTS Plus. But if you never used it before, then you would first have to enable it and configure it a bit. Then you would have to configure an application type that is made especially for SAP Cloud Platform. And that is to tell the ABAP system what is to be done with this special type of system. So you would have a system named SAP Cloud Platform or whatever in your CTS environment, and that gets some special attachments. It's a transport request attached to it, but inside the transport requests, there are the objects that are created by SAP Cloud Platform. And the ABAP system needs to know what to do with these different type of objects. And that's why we need to configure this application type, which is then made for calling the correct deployment tool to get this stuff deployed to your target cloud platform accounts. And then you would create your representations of the different accounts that you have inside the CTS system. So for these, you would also still need a 3-letter acronym. So the SID of ABAP systems is also needed for non-ABAP systems, even if they don't have a real SID in the classical sense. But that's how systems are organized in CTS. You have to have a unique SID on one transport domain controller to get the systems differentiated one from each other. And then you would need to create the transport routes as you do in the classical CTS as well between these different systems on the CTS Plus system side. So could be SAP Solution Manager, for example. So how would the process look like? You would develop in the environment that you know that belongs to your application. And then you would use CTS Plus integration when you finished your development, when you do the export. So it really differs from application to application, how this export process looks like. But at some point in time, there's, for example, a download that contains all of the files, all of the objects that you touched. And in this process, the idea is that CTS Plus gets plugged in there so that instead of downloading, you do also have the option to attach the objects to a transport request. And these transport requests, as I already said, are managed in the Transport Organizer Web UI. This Transport Organizer Web UI is what is SE09 for ABAP. In there, you can find the transport request that you currently have. You would have one request that is your default request, your pre-selected request, and that could be used by default in the application process when exporting something. Then it depends again on how deep the integration of the respective application into CTS Plus is, but it might be the case that you can look into the transport request and cannot only see the file, the zip file or whatever of the application, but also a more detailed view of the objects that are inside this application object that are exported from the development environment. And that's what you would see in the lower part in the object list, for example. In there, in this SE09 replacement, Transport Organizer Web UI, you would also release the transport request. So there are no tasks involved in this case. It's only the transport request because the object is already finished when you export it from the development environment. So there's nothing to be done to be approved anymore by releasing tasks. And that's why we use the transport request directly, release it, and then it gets attached or added to the queue of the import systems. And there you can then, again, do the import all, import single, as you need it for your transport strategy. Okay, so that's the development environment in more detail. So that's a very old example, but nevertheless, that's the idea how it would look like. You would have the packaged content of what you developed, see it in a list, for example, in the application. And then when you export this, you would be able to use the Transport Organizer Web UI, have a link to the Transport Organizer Web UI, and manage your transport request. You can also in here, as in other, or in classical ABAP, assign other developers to the same transport request so that you get objects that belong together combined in one transport request. The logs that are created when you import something are also visible inside this Transport Organizer Web UI. So there's a special tab, but you can also view for sure the logs on the CTS Plus or on the CTS side on the SAP Solution Manager, for example. So inside the normal log viewer of STMS. And that's what we see in here. So the system landscape looks very similar. Also for the non-ABAP systems, the import queue looks very similar. And then you can simply also use the double click, for example, on the return code to get the details of the import, of what might have gone wrong. So you will also hopefully find for most of the applications the return code or the return code coloring, as you know it from CTS, as you know it from ABAP, which will reflect whether the import was successful or not with these 4 return code options. So 0 for OK, 4 for warnings, 8 for some errors, and 12 for severe things, to get an overview whether the import was successful or what might be the severity of the error. Another thing that we have to combine, for example, CTS and CTS Plus, is central CTS. It's only available with SAP Solution Manager, Change Request Management, and Quality Gate Management. What it does is it sets some kind of system, we call it a cluster, on top of each system type. So you can combine development systems to one cluster. The idea is that when you develop something on the ABAP side and you develop something, for example, on the cloud side, which relies on changes that you did on the ABAP side, that you can combine these things in one change, in one, what we call, collection. So that you have the transport requests that are made for the different landscapes combined in one collection. And this means that these transport requests are always transported together. And this hopefully helps you to make a new functionality available to the business users completely at the same time in production. So no one has to take care that the cloud parts and the backend parts are transported at the same time, are available at the same time if you use this collection, because the transport requests are combined in this collection and will be imported together. And that's the idea of the central CTS, to hopefully help you combine the things that belong together in one change with the collection in the background. So to simplify your life, and you don't have to take a look at different queues to make this all available at production for the production users at the same time. The latest innovation that we have in this area is the Git-enabled CTS. And as I said, that's only a short glimpse on that for today. We will have a separate session on this in October. But the very basic idea of the GCTS is that you now use Git as the storage for your ABAP objects. So whenever you develop something and release the transport request, the objects are for sure still available on the ABAP side, but releasing the transport request would now mean that a new commit is created inside a respective repository that you defined. And you will see the commits in this list of commits that are available also on your production and on your test system. And then you can choose from the commits and get them imported into the respective system. In the background, there's still the classical CTS. So when you export something, you release a transport request. This will result in the new commit. And when you import something, there are also transport requests involved in the background. Different transport requests than when you import it. So there is no transport request anymore, which goes through the whole transport route. And especially there is no transport route required anymore in case of GCTS. You can for sure still have these transport routes. You can also start with GCTS on a small project with one package, for example, and get it, test it how you like GCTS. For all the other objects, you can still use the classical CTS. So it's possible to use things in parallel for different objects. So you should not switch for one object to CTS, to GCTS, and back and forth and so on. But you can use for different packages, both mechanisms of transporting in parallel for one system landscape. So let's check a bit how this could maybe simplify your software lifecycle process for ABAP if you like to work with continuous integration, continuous deployment processes. So this is especially maybe of interest for you if you already have CI/CD processes available for your non-ABAP development environments. So with GCTS, you can now also go the way of non-ABAP working processes with pipeline and so on, also for your ABAP stuff. For developers, things start where they are used to. So they will still use the ABAP development tools or SE80 for creating or managing transport requests. They will use SE09. So they will still use transport requests, track the changes that they do inside these transport requests, and they will still have to release the tasks and the transport requests. But after that, the process can change. So you would then be able to push stuff that you changed, objects, to a repository. And starting with that, you could include a CI server, like for example, Jenkins or whatever, that manages your pipelines. So you would be able, for example, to use this to automatically deploy what is inside the new commit into your QA system, automatically execute some tests, and work on the feedback. So if the tests were okay, things could go maybe in a CD process, if you like, to get stuff to the production system. Or if there were errors detected during this automatic test execution, you could also restart the process somehow. So create a new transport request or a new task and release it and get it again, deploy it automatically, test it, and so on, until the feedback is okay and things can go to production. So this would then, for example, mean that you could use a second branch, merge the changes that you did during this process into what could be called, for example, a release branch. And from this release branch, you could then deploy automatically, create pull requests, whatever your process looks like, and get stuff deployed to all the follow-on systems that you might have in addition. So it can be pre-production, production, whatever you need. And this would also mean, if you import a new commit, this would also mean that the changes are imported into the background with a standard transport request and will be deployed automatically into the production system. So the objects are imported and are activated and are ready for use after you imported a commit into this respective system. Another big difference of GCTS compared to the classical CTS is that you can just choose the latest commit and get it imported into your target system. You don't need to import the whole queue of transport requests as you had to do it before. So you don't need to import each and every commit, just the latest. And in the background, there's a automatical detection done between what has been in the system before and what has changed in this latest commit that you chose. All of the differences will be packed into one transport request and will be imported at once. So that's how GCTS works. No need to work on the complete import queue anymore. Okay, so that's it for the ABAP part. Let's go ahead with the non-ABAP parts. So one thing that we have is the HOLM, and the other thing is CI processes and the TMS, Transport Management Service, that we have in the cloud. So for HOLM, HANA Application Lifecycle Management, that's a tool made for managing changes, doing transports, export and import for the HANA repository. So it works for HANA 2.10 and HANA 1.0, but only for the repository stuff. So as soon as you move to XSA, as soon as you go to HDI, then HOLM is not supported anymore. So how does it work? Also in HOLM, you would model your transport landscape. So you would create a development, a test, and a production system. But this time it works a bit different than the classical CTS. So it's not the case anymore that stuff is pushed to some kind of import queue of any system, but that you would need to go to the target system and get the content from the previous system. So for sure, you know which system is the predecessor somehow, but you would need to get the content. It's not automatically becoming part of any queue. What you can do with HOLM is you can integrate it with CTS Plus into the CTS processes so that you can also combine it with change request management and so on of SAP Solution Manager. So that's something, but that's something that you need to enable especially. So to get this CTS integration, there's a configuration to be done. And for sure, you need to define an SID. So because HANA itself, pure HANA without ABAP, doesn't work with SIDs at the first glance. And so you need to define an SID both on the CTS side and inside HOLM that establishes the connection. And yeah, for sure, you need to know which CTS system is used. So how do you get the connection to the different systems? Okay, But that just as a short excursion, because we now would more go for the transport management system when we look in HANA 2.0. So the basic flow of CI processes would mean that, as you could also now use it for GCTS with for ABAP, would mean that someone writes some code. The code changes are pushed to a source code management system. From there, the central source code management system would trigger a CI server, also like we've seen it for ABAP, and that's how you get the connection, how you could also, again, combine ABAP and non-ABAP worlds. Start a pipeline on the CI server, and for sure send feedback to the developer. So with CTS Plus, with Central CTS, we provided the option to integrate non-ABAP into the ABAP world. And now with GCTS, we offer the other way around as well, so that you can integrate ABAP into this non-ABAP world of CI processes, DevOps processes, and so on. So both ways are now possible. Okay, so for continuous integration, the idea is that you would then, for example, have a central code repository, that you have automated building processes and so on, and that you can enable this testing. And so these are all the basic ideas, what a pipeline is about, what or how the life of a developer could be simplified to get his stuff tested frequently, early and often, and that he has the option to fix things on his own in a short cycle without having to wait for a long process until a lot of development goes to a test system, and then many people would have to correct things. With these CI processes, stuff is much quicker. So that's the basic idea. What we have in the cloud platform is the transport management service that you can use. So this would mean that you have a application, a service that you can integrate or that you can activate in your accounts. I think there is also a different presentation session in this curriculum where you get more details about the general DevOps offerings that we have for SAP Cloud Platform. So that's just a small excerpt from that. How could this look like? So for the cloud platform, you can use this transport management service. You don't need any ABAP in that. So there's no on-premise stuff required. You also don't need an ABAP system in the cloud or whatever. It's purely cloud-centered, and it's a service that you can subscribe to, that you can buy, and then you could export stuff from your one account and import it. And there's also the option in TMS to manage transport routes. We'll come to this in a second. The other option for sure is still that you have CTS Plus in place. It's not replaced by the transport management service in the cloud. So both of them are available depending on your needs. On the transport management service, you would also configure your landscape. So you would have nodes, as they are called, in there. You would have a node which represents your dev account. You would create destinations to your test account and to your production account, so that you have one landscape so that you know where objects that are developed need to go to. So it's available in Neo and Cloud Foundry. You would work with MTA archives, and there's also an integration in Project Piper. Now, I don't know whether you heard about Project Piper. That's a somehow open source project where SAP provides a lot of content, and that helps you to set up pipelines. The idea is that you can find pipeline steps or even pre-configured pipelines in there that you can download and modify them according to your needs, so that you can set up pipelines on your Jenkins server, be it on-premise server or in the cloud, it doesn't matter. And then you can simplify your life for many different scenarios. So there's Piper steps available for this transport management service. There's Piper steps available for a change request and QTM integration of TMS. There's also Piper steps available for the Git-enabled CTS, so for the ABAP world. So it's really maybe worth looking into it, whether you can use these steps, whether you can use the pre-configured scenarios or libraries before you start developing your own pipeline and create each step on your own. Okay, so this is again, how does all of this work together? So in your data center, you could have the SAP Solution Manager with Charm and Quality Gate Management, and also for CTS Plus, CTS and GCTS and so on. And you could have an integration also to from Charm to the Transport Management Service. For GCTS, the integration into Charm and Quality Gate Management is not yet there. That's why it says integration planned. So CTS and CTS Plus are for sure integrated in SAP Solution Manager. For GCTS, the integration is under development. And you could integrate all of this also with the transport management. So without having it on premise, so that you could have the processes that you might already have set up in change request management or in quality gate management, also for your cloud platform via this way. So you don't need to integrate the cloud platform accounts necessarily via CTS Plus. You could also use the transport management service, and you don't need to set up CTS Plus for that. Okay, so that was a very quick rush through all of the transport options that we have. On this slide, I tried to collect all the links that might hopefully help. So there's a page on SAP Support Portal where you can find links to all the different tools that we have. There are the guides for CTS Plus. So if you would like to use CTS Plus, then it's worth checking this page to get an idea whether the application that you would like to use with CTS Plus supports CTS Plus. For many applications that SAP has, there's an integration available, but it's also possible for sure that this is not the case. It's possible to program the integration for yourself. So CTS Plus has an open API that you can use to program this integration and get your integration done in a different way, or maybe also talk to your vendor to ask him to get or support you with this integration. We have the transport management service documentation on the SAP Help portal and a blog which describes in detail how this integration of TMS into Charm is done. Then there is a big DevOps learning journey that helps you or that tries to describe how DevOps can be done in an SAP environment. And last but not least, this is the link to the Project Piper where you can find all of the details. Okay, so with this, I hope that I did not lose you completely. And then maybe Svea, we can go for the Q&A.
Yes, we can go for the Q&A. We did some joking because it was only slide 19, which could not present it properly. So like the internet connection doesn't like slide 19, but I think you covered it very well. So let us go into the Q&A. You can also open the Q&A window for you, Karin,
yes,
so that you can see which of the questions can be answered easily.
Yeah, I did so.
Okay, then you can just go ahead and start.
Okay, so let's start from the top. Does HTA support assignment from objects to packages or per object basis? It's on object basis.
That was an easy one.
Yeah. Oops, it's jumping. Okay.
Yes, I click it answered, then you can go ahead with the next one from Siegfried.
Okay, sorry,
maybe.
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything in between. Okay. Is there a manual for connecting STP? Yes, for connecting STPs to CTS Plus. You can also find guides on this CTS Plus guides page in the SAP support portal. Since we have used the Transport Organizer Web UI, where's the non-ABAP part of a CTS Plus transported to in the target systems, and it's not part of the dictionary? I'm not clear on where the content goes to, or is it just for cloud content? So first of all, it's not just for cloud content. To a transport, if a transport request is a CTS Plus transport request, it contains the MTAR, jar, whatever file of the respective application. And the file is then handed over to the deployment tool of the respective application. So that's why we had to establish this or create this application type so that we know the respective deployment tool. The deployment tool that's also some part of the integration of CTS Plus that has to be developed. So the respective deployment tool takes the file that it gets from CTS, deploys it, checks whether everything was okay, as it normally does, and then returns back to CTS Plus the result of the deployment. So hopefully a detailed deployment protocol, sometimes a shorter one, whatever. And then you can view the result of the import also on the CTS Plus site in the ABAP site. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I hope so too. And if you would,
please ask again.
Yeah, that's true. And if you would read the question out here, the next one, so
yes.
Because it might be that not everyone is seeing that.
Yeah, sure. I try. HDA for HDI, does this require an XSA is installed on each system in the landscape? No, the configuration only needs to be done on the development system. There's also a big guide for the configuration available on the CTS landing page. So because it's not CTS Plus, you don't find it on the CTS Plus page, but on the CTS landing page, there's a section about HDA for HDI. And in there you can find the link to this guide. And in this guide, there's also a chapter in the beginning, which explains the architecture and the systems needed and what is needed on which system and so on. What are the blue marked DC in the system landscape images? So DC means domain controller. If you have a non-ABAP system landscape, you need one system. If you have, for an ABAP landscape, sorry, not non-ABAP, one system is defined as the domain controller. That is the system where the landscapes are managed. What is the strategy of SAP in future regarding ABAP objects, CTS and or GCTS? Both. So we do not plan to remove CTS, for sure not. GCTS is just an additional offering if you like to go for DevOps processes for your ABAP stuff. If you're fine with the classical CTS, you can use it. There's absolutely no restrictions and no plans to remove it. And CTS is also very much needed in the background for sure if you implement SAP support packages or nodes and so on. So there are no plans to go to GCTS with the standard delivery of SAP. So we will always remain with SAP nodes in the classical way. We will remain with SPAM and so on. So there's no plans to go for GCTS in general. Meaning with GCTS, one may discover a transport request will be transported directly into prod. This needs to be explained to auditors. No, it's not directly imported into the production. It depends on how. So in principle, without having any pipeline or whatever set up, GCTS does nothing special or nothing fancy in the background. You release the transport request, and the result of releasing the transport request is a new commit on your Git repository. Nothing else happens. So you can then go to your test system and import the respective commit. It will not automatically import it on the production system. So there's no automatisms in behind. It's up to you to automate this by the help of pipelines or whatever if you like to. But GCTS out of itself does not automate any imports. How do GCTS and Charm work exist together? Can they be combined? Would that make sense at all? What about investments put into Charm when moving to GCTS? Integration of GCTS into Charm is not available right now. We are working on this. We hope that we can provide it with the next service pack of SAP Solution Manager. And for sure, it makes sense because you need to control your processes, because you might need to combine it with other imports and so on as well, because you have the auditors that require documentation of all the things that happened. And maybe Jenkins or whatever CI server is not yet accepted as a documentation tool or whatever. So it makes sense to combine this, and we are working on that. Starting with which release is GCTS available for on-premise releases? So GCTS is only available on-premise. SAP Cloud Platform ABAP environment uses GCTS in the background, but in a bit of a different way. They provided their own UIs on top of it. And you cannot, up to now, work with the repository. So you cannot look into the repository in SAP Cloud Platform ABAP environment. So the process that we have seen for GCTS, this simple CI/CD process, only works for on-premise. And it's available first with S/4HANA 1909. In S/4HANA 1909, it can only manage Workbench transport requests. With S/4HANA 2020, you can then also use GCTS for customizing. Will there be a downport of GCTS? No, it's very hard to downport it because we rely on a lot of new technology stuff that is not available in 1809 or whatever, maybe ECC release, so we cannot have that downported. In CTS Plus, how to bring the non-SAP changes via upload functionality. Is Charm plays any role bringing the non-SAP changes into SAP transport request? Not sure that I got it. So CTS Plus works the same way almost as you do in your ABAP development process. So you go to your development environment, you then export stuff from there. And while exporting in this case would then mean attach this non-ABAP object to an ABAP transport request, release the transport request, and import it into the target system. And on top of all of this, you can have Charm, like you can have it for ABAP. So there's no real difference on how transport requests are handled inside Charm.
So we thank you very much, Karin. There were a lot of questions. So we take the last one and then we shut the call. It's from Alex. Is there a plan to remove dependency between GCTS and transport release so we can have more frequent commits to GitHub?
Yes, there's no plan. It's already available. You can release a task and create a new commit whenever you release a task. This is not part of the standard, but there is a block that describes how to implement a business add-in, so a body, to get this done on task level.
Perfect.
Okay. Shall I answer this last question that just came up in the Q&A tool?
Yeah, but afterwards we really have to shut down.
Yeah, do you like that? Working with branches will be used as per DevOps. So when we pull a feature branch in our on-premise system, will it automatically adjust with the transports already there and doesn't make any chaos? Yeah, that's why I said you should decide whether for a certain object you would like to go via CTS or via GCTS. So you should not switch for one or the other object. And if you decide to go for a certain object for GCTS, you should release all transport requests in classical CTS before that include this object. So to avoid any chaos, that's really the idea. And for sure, you can work with branches. In the first release of S/4HANA 1909, there's no conflict resolution possible. So we don't have any special support for that. But with S/4HANA 2020, that's improved. There we do have a conflict resolution UI that supports you with solving the conflicts. And there you can also stop the automatic pulling and pushing when importing a commit. But maybe that's more a topic for the 24th of November, not for today.
Yeah, that's right. And I have pasted here also the links in the chat. And I guess the presentation will be available afterwards, also with a recording, right?
On 24th?
So, you know, I mean,
yes.
this presentation, you will share it with the audience.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. All right, then thanks very much, Karin. It was a great presentation. A lot of people attended, and thanks for asking all the questions. And yeah, I wish everyone a nice rest of the day and keep in contact so that you can join one of the next calls on this series. Thank you.
Okay.